Sometimes I have a dream of a farm. Only the farm isn't a dream. The farm is where I live. Sometimes I dream of a man with the head of a pig. Only the pig man isn't a dream. He stands out in the fields every night and he watches me. Sometimes I have a dream where the pigman says my name, a name I haven't used in a long, long time. This one is a dream. The pigman never speaks to me. Last night, I didn't dream about any of that. I dreamt of an apple. I walked through an orchard and everything was dry and dead. I was alone. There wasn't anything abnormal about that. Through all the withered wood, I caught a glimpse of something bright and red. Rushing over, I saw the apple at the highest point on the tree. So I scraped my knees and knuckles up, climbing to get it. I twisted and pulled it off, and when I took a bite, the taste of salt filled my mouth. I didn't like it, but I ate the entire thing. Juice ran down my chin, and I threw the core at the sky. Then I woke up, wondering how my mouth still tasted like seawater. I quickly realized it wasn't something unexplainably carrying over from my dream. Just me forgetting to brush my teeth the night before. I got up and did my rounds in the morning mist. Then I took an extra hot shower. Today was going to be a long day. After cooking breakfast, doing chores, and anything else I could think of to put off leaving, I told Aunt Jean I'd be gone for an hour or two, and to make sure things were still at least somewhat normal around here. She just smiled at me and rocked away in her rocking chair, knitting an infinity scarf. Infinity as in it was a good 15 feet long and still going. I admired her dedication for as long as was reasonable, then just a little longer before loading onto Old Blue. The four-wheeler choked a few times, but she wasn't going to do me the favor of dying just when I wanted her to. Dust swallowed the path behind me as I tore around Silver's Curve toward town. There was something bitter in the air that was unusual. It clung to the back of my throat and sinuses. It stayed around long after I'd reached the cracked asphalt of Battleman. Two-Tooth Steve was looking extra chipper today. When I walked in, he was humming along to System of a Down as he held a duckling. He was painting a small riot red mohawk on the head of the tiny ball of fluff and feathers. In lieu of a greeting, he held her out to me and stuck the brush back in the animal-safe paint. His free hand went up to his chin, like he was appraising a priceless painting. "What do you think? Was red the right call? That's the one little Harriet here picked." Harriet quacked as if saying, "Damn right I did. I think it suits her." And with that, Two-Tooth Steve stuck Harriet in his shirt pocket. "Was wondering when I'd see you again, Newport. How are the girls doing?" Two-Tooth Steve is a 6'5" metalhead with more piercings and tattoos than you can shake a stick at, and he owns the hardware and farm supply store in town. I'm lucky for it. He's one of the only people here who seems to enjoy having me around. Good. Always good. I think I need to switch back to the old feed, though. They're laying weird eggs again, the kind of stuff I don't think would get FDA approved. Two-Tooth Steve nodded, poking his tongue thoughtfully through the gap where his two front teeth should have been. "What color?" I counted up the eggs and handed the basket over to him. A little bit redder than Harriet's nudo. Also, there was a little creature inside of it that was definitely not any kind of chicken. I think I saw a tentacle. Ooh. Yeah, I think I'm going to stop selling that kind. I've heard some weird things. He handed me 2 large sacks of the old feed, and I hefted them onto my shoulders. Sometimes he would just pay me outright for the eggs, but most of the time we had a barter system. He said nobody else had eggs quite like mine, that there was just something special about them. Other than that, they're fine. Beelzebub went AWOL the other day, but she made it back express via poultry post. Two-Tooth Steve didn't question it. He'd heard enough weird stories from me, and he'd seen enough on his own. Oh, what her avian eyes must have witnessed. I laughed. At least I wasn't the only one who could wax poetic about a chicken. "You're telling me she's got a new one now?" I picked out a few other things, the most exciting of which being a shiny new rake for the barn, and paid him the difference from the cash I took from the lockbox at home. "See you next week?" I nodded. This was an emergency trip for the chickens, but every other Wednesday was shopping day. The landlady took care of most of my needs, but I was on my own with farm necessities. Oh yeah, Hephaestus gets cranky when he doesn't get a new salt lick. I'll be here even if a zombie plague descends upon us. Hey, I never turn down a paying customer, higher brain function or not. Harriet quacked again, and I valued her effort to be involved in the conversation. Then I took my things, said goodbye, and left. On most days, that would have been the end of it. I would have gone home and went back to my rural bubble, fit for only one. But I had packed a lunch for myself on a whim, and I was unusually hungry thinking about it. I decided that it might be nice to sit in the square and watch the cotton ball clouds drift by. Little did I know that a peanut butter and strawberry sandwich would alter the course of my life forever. Because as I walked into the square, that's when he first spoke to me. "Did you find your chicken?" I raised my eyebrow and turned to where the voice had come from. Sometimes the other farmers would set up stands here on clear afternoons, selling fruit and vegetables and whatever else they had in excess from what they made a living off of. I was never keen on the whole farmer's market thing, but this guy sure was. His little stand was decorated with papier-mâché flowers, and he had a few baskets full of admittedly cinema-perfect apples. "Are you talking to me?" It was a stupid question, considering we were the only two people around. But I was the #1 champion for 20 years running when it came to stupid questions. "Yeah. Did you find your chicken? I saw your poster. I was worried about Beelzebub." Beelzebub. His broad nose scrunched just a little, as if he'd just caught a whiff of his own brain melting. Bubblezoob. Beelzebub. I turned away from him and started walking toward the fountain. To my surprise and annoyance, he followed me. "Beelzebub?" I sat down on the edge and pretended that unwrapping my sandwich was the most interesting thing to be doing in the world. "Close enough. Yeah, I found her." He sat down next to me, and I took a minute to get a good look at him while he wasn't making eye contact. He had a few good inches on me, but totally not enough to make me feel small. He tied his long black hair into a ponytail, and his skin, the color of Alabama clay, was sticky with summer sweat. "Are you okay? You're kind of staring at me right now." The non-eye contact apparently hadn't lasted long. I blinked and looked away, focusing all my energy and trying to keep my face from going red. If I'd been trying any harder, it would have turned blue. "I'm fine. Don't think there's any rules against looking at people." "Well, yeah, of course not. I wanted to make sure you weren't having a seizure or something. My aunt used to do that sometimes. Anyway, I'm glad you found your chicken. I saw the missing poster on my morning run the last few days. I'm Dawson. I live a little ways down the road from you. My family owns the apple orchard, and also the sheep. My mom also keeps bees. We've got a jack-of-all-trades, master of three thing going on. Newport. It wasn't that he wasn't being nice. It was that he was being too nice. He was being nice in the way that could have only been a joke when directed at someone who had the kind of reputation I did. We were on a playground, and he was the boy that wanted to go out with me. Yeah, sure. I took a bite of my sandwich, giving myself an excuse not to talk. But he seemed utterly unfazed. "Oh, Newport. Is that your name? Like the cigarettes? That's such a kick-ass name. I think it suits you. You know, I see you around sometimes and you always look so lonely. Is it true what they say? Do you..." I stood up and started walking back to my four-wheeler. I didn't know what he'd heard, and I didn't want to. And of fucking course, he walked right after me. "Wait. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. I actually have something for you." I turned around sharply, staring him down. His big green eyes were filled with remorse, and I hated that it felt real. "What? What do you want?" I shouldn't have said that. I kind of realize how it sounds now. A small part of me wanted to believe him, but most of me just wanted this interaction over. I wanted to go home and back to my solitude. I wanted to lose myself in a record. Music doesn't give you false pretenses of kindness unless it's supposed to. But you can always turn music off. Turning people off was a lot more complicated than it sounded. Save it. What do you want to give me? Dawson pulled an apple from his overall pocket and offered it out to me. It was the most gorgeous piece of fruit I'd ever seen, and I instantly despised it. Why are you giving me this? I didn't move to take it. One case of not enough stranger danger involving accepting an apple had done enough to make my life hell, and I was not about to be Eve 2.0. It's a gift. I've got plenty. I narrowed my eyes at him. I knew it had been coming. The hidden something in this interaction. Oh, because I can't pay for my own apples? That's probably the thing you've heard, isn't it? That I'm the poor, filthy it that lives in a shack out in the sticks and bites the heads off chickens or something. Dawson looked down at the apple, then back at me. His thick eyebrows pinched in concern. Nothing like that, Newport. It's just an apple. I knew I willingly gave him my name, but how dare he use it like that? I snatched the apple out of his hand, if only so he'd finally leave me alone. Listen to me. I'm not yours or anybody's charity case. Do you know what I'm going to do with this, huh? Dawson got a stupid smile on his face. He looked like I was trying to tell him a joke, and he didn't understand the punchline, but he thought I was funny anyway. Eat it? No. I'm going to take it home, sit in my kitchen window and watch it rot. I expected him to frown, maybe turn away, or even take the apple back. But it was becoming clear to me that Dawson didn't care what I expected. Instead, his eyebrows jumped so high they might as well have launched off his face. But he didn't lose that smile. Just make sure you compost it afterward. Mother Nature will thank you. I stuffed away the sandwich that I'd only taken one bite out of with a squish. Then I continued walking back to my four-wheeler. This time, Dawson didn't follow me. He just watched me go with an idiotic grin. I pulled out my Zippo and lit one of the hand-rolled cigarettes I'd brought with me. Then I jumped on Old Blue and sped off back towards home. Halfway back to the farm and all the way through my cigarette, I pulled out the mushed remains of my sandwich. I was still starving and beginning to feel a little faint. Riding with one arm was risky, but falling off my four-wheeler at high speed because I hadn't eaten since early this morning was definitely more so. I only made it a few bites in before I realized that something was definitely not right. The tart taste of strawberries turned sour and musty. It was like licking a carpet, and not in a good way. When I pulled open the sandwich to give it my best Gordon Ramsay impression, what I saw made me lose control of the four-wheeler. My back hit the ground hard as Old Blue careened into the ditch. That was going to hurt like a bitch tomorrow. I rolled over and emptied my guts all over the ground, painting it with peanut butter and chunks of rotten meat. The abomination that had once been my lunch somehow landed only a few feet away, and I could smell it from here. I swatted a few ants off of my hand, residue from the ones that swarmed over the molded bird corpse that had appeared in my sandwich. Before I could make it to my feet, I heard something shifting around in the thick brush just ahead. I crawled over to my sideways four-wheeler, shrinking against the frame. Then all around me came the unmistakable sound of buzzing flies. My skin had been crawling before, but I was lucky then that it didn't crawl right off my body. As dread slowly washed over me, I tried to make myself as small and invisible as possible. I could hear cloven hooves approaching over the sounds of insects, and a wet, wheezing laugh that could have only come from lungs riddled with sickness. In the leaves, I saw two hollow sockets, and that's when I have to hide. Became I need to run. With a rush of adrenaline that most people have to go 14,000 feet for, I stood up and pushed Old Blue back on all four wheels. Then I jumped on and raced down the ditch, no doubt doing damage to the tires. But I'd worry about that later. Whatever I'd seen, it didn't follow me. I don't remember how I got out of the ditch, but I made it home in record time. The next moment I remember clearly was standing in the barn. If my watch wasn't slow, it had been a little less than 30 minutes since I'd left town. Glancing out at the four-wheeler, I saw that the only thing that had suffered from the crash was the rake. It was slightly mangled at the edge, but that was nothing a good hammer couldn't fix. Not even Old Blue herself had any damage. It all felt a little too lucky. Sally was up on the ceiling again, her hooves clopping against the wood. It was a lot easier to focus on that than whatever the hell had just happened. Her pen partner, Davy Crockett, just looked up and watched her with complacency. His eyes told a story, and that story started with wives, am I right? You can't stay up there forever, Sally Ann. You're going to make yourself sick. She stared at me with her big yellow eyes, and then she opened her mouth. But instead of a bleat, out came a scream. Run! I practically threw myself out of the barn and made a mad dash for the house. I'd only made it onto the porch when I realized that the voice had been a familiar one. Of course, it hadn't come from Sally. Everybody knows goats only scream Taylor Swift. It had been my well-spoken friend, living in my water supply at the edge of my backyard. Anna Well was still shouting her warning, and though knowing it was her still didn't ease my anxiety, I didn't break my door down trying to get inside. The walls only muffled the screeches a little. There was an endless list of things that needed to be done, but all I could do was pace around the room. Something about how I'd gotten away so easily wasn't sitting right with me. As I sat the apple I'd been given onto the windowsill, I was just beginning to accept that maybe the paranoia was stronger than usual today. Maybe the whole thing had been a vivid, waking nightmare. Falling asleep on my four-wheeler sounded about like something I would do. That was when I saw a shape in the distance, moving up the long path to my house. Horror built in me, clogging my throat like an insidious golf ball. The idea that it was the thing I'd encountered on my way home scared me, but the possibility that it wasn't terrified me even more. I couldn't deal with destiny today. Even if I could get the shot right, you had to be in the right state of mind to dispose of a body. Nevertheless, I grabbed my shotgun and rushed out onto the porch. The figure was definitely a person, but I still couldn't make out who it was. I checked the chamber, dropped to one knee, and thumbed off the safety. Even with a deep breath, my hands were still shaking. But I lined up the shot and took it. Sometimes I wonder how different my life would have been if I hadn't missed that shot. The one thing I'm certain of is it would have been a whole lot worse, and probably a lot shorter. Instead of running away like any sensible person who just nearly took a bullet to the brain, the tall figure ran toward my house. It was then that I recognized that my trespasser was entirely human and probably didn't know the first thing about tax evasion and foreclosure. Dawson had already made it halfway up the path, and I leveled the gun back at him. I missed intentionally this time, but not by much. He had to get the message. I did not want him here. To my surprise, he ran faster. I would have been worried he was coming to kill me if his face wasn't full of fear. Resigning myself to another interaction with him, I clicked the safety back on and walked back into the house, leaving the door open as I put my shotgun back in its usual spot. I grabbed a water bottle from the fridge, knowing I was definitely going to need to be hydrated for whatever this was. When I turned back around, Dawson was out of breath, doubled over in my doorway. It had to have been the fear stealing his breath. He was built like a redwood. Adrenaline's one hell of a drug, isn't it? There was a singed spot in his hair where the first bullet had just barely missed him. Oh, thank God you were here. Someone was shooting at me. I knew I would be safe here with you. I was shooting at you. Dawson's face crinkled in thought, and then he straightened up. Instead of cursing me out or leaving or any other number of deserved aggressions, he looked at me with an innocent and confused smile, as if I'd just let the door close on him. Why'd you do that? I offered him a water bottle, but gave him a dark look along with it, so he knew it wasn't an invitation to stay. Because you're a trespasser. Didn't you see the sign? It says private property. Trespassers will be executed. Dawson drained the entire water bottle in one go, then pulled something out of his pocket. And I'm guessing this is your private property too? I stared at the Zippo in his hands. I felt several spikes of retroactive panic and grabbed at it. He let me snatch it out of his hand without resistance, and I clutched it tight to my chest. Where did you get this? Did you take it? Dawson shook his head earnestly. You dropped it as you were leaving. I got this weird hunch it wasn't just something you picked up from Walmart. didn't bother correcting him. The coop was fixed, and so I lit my cigarette and offered Dawson one. The guy put off a vibe like he dreamt in anti-smoking ads, but he took it anyway. I looked out to the forest, and then back to him. Well, there are things around here. Things like Harry, and the lady that screams down in the well. But they don't really live here. It's just me. And I guess I do get lonely. But it's hard to even remember how lonely feels. Everything becomes unremarkable when you deal with it for long enough. And when loneliness is your default setting, well, I shook my head and took a long drag. I turned away, waiting for Dawson to tell me how sad that, and by extension, my life was. But it never came. Instead, I noticed something moving through the trees. The ground began to turn black, racing toward me like a heat-seeking missile. Before I could even make it a step back, I was staring into the milky white of a diseased bovine eye, inches away from my face. This thing must have picked it up at the discount store in the time since I had seen it last. Then I blinked, and my surroundings changed entirely. All the green had been replaced with barren grays and browns, and my home was little more than a wasteland in nuclear summer. There was only one other thing in this empty place. What had once been a mildly annoying farmer boy, sweet-talking some chicks, was now a sun-bleached skeleton. The cigarette I'd given him still hung from its mouth, smoking lightly. I opened my mouth to say something, anything. But the words just weren't there. My brain had tried to process all of this for about 2 seconds before hanging up the "Gone Fishin'" sign. "Are you okay, dude? You're staring at me again." His teeth clicked together as he spoke, and he reached a bony hand up and took the cigarette from his mouth. I think I should be asking you that. You're literally a skeleton right now." Even with no possible way he could have an expression on his face, I still knew he was smiling. And not just a permanent, I have no cheek smile. You know, my mom tells me that a lot. I just put it off as her being her. But maybe she has a point. I blinked, and within that half a second, everything was normal again. The color hurt my eyes, but I didn't want to close them just in case it somehow sent me back. "Did I upset you again? Feel free to ignore what I said." I scooped up Beelzebub and held her close, glad she hadn't gotten turned into chicken scratch. "Sorry, what did you say?" "I think I missed it." Dawson gently placed the chicks he was holding back into the coop, and the hens swiftly followed. I said that I think you're a strong person. Maybe that sounds stupid, but it takes a lot to be able to make it on your own. You're clearly doing well for yourself out here. It's honorable in a strange way. I kind of really admire you for it." My cigarette nearly fell from between my lips. I didn't know what to say, and I assumed he thought he'd upset me. So we just stared at each other for a minute. "Geez, give me a medal, why don't you?" I was fighting a stacked battle against the smile that wanted to come over my face, and losing terribly. "You're not mad at me?" "Oh, I'm mad at you for several reasons. But no, that's not one of them." Once all but one of the chickens were all safe inside their refurbished one-bedroom apartment, Dawson and I began to head back to the house. "Wait, I thought you said you lived alone? Who is that?" Aunt Jean was standing on the porch, a glass of lemonade in one hand, and a corn spider big enough to kill a rabbit rested on her other. I'd been wondering what the bumping around in the attic was the night before, so I guess that answered that question. "What? It's just a corn spider." Dawson shook his head and pointed toward the old woman. She grinned and waved him off like a shy debutante. "Oh, you mean Aunt Jean? I wouldn't say she lives here. It's more like she exists here. I don't really know what her deal is, but she's nice. She won't bite you. Actually, no. Scratch that. She probably won't bite you. I still don't fully know what that lady is capable of." Aunt Jean waved before bending down and letting the corn spider climb off her arm. Like a watchman returning to his post, it began a slow crawl back to the cornfield. Then she walked back inside. I glanced at the house, then to Dawson, then the house again. I was probably going to regret it later. but he accepted the invitation before I had any time to really consider what I was doing. I had a brand new Florence plus the machine record that I hadn't played nearly enough, and I wanted to feel out his music taste. You know, you're weird, Newport. Really weird. But I like weird things. I opened the door for him, bringing Bees in with me. If I decided to get rid of him after all, I knew she would lend a wing. Say one more sappy thing and I'll put you on an express flight to the moon on Fist Airlines. I couldn't say fully how I felt about Dawson yet, but the unnamed evil lurking around had made me realize something. I much preferred him alive rather than dead.